Here we go.
Okay, everyone. Good morning from Austria and Switzerland to Russia, Asia, wherever you are. Happy to see you again, those who were joining our seminar a few months ago, where we talked about the big picture. And today we want to provide you with more information regarding the center of the body, the core, and how important that is, not only for general health, but also for performance in Sambo and in other sports. So we will go through little theory today to understand some basic principles, and then we will show you today many practical examples, exercises from basics. That is very important that the basics are working, not only for children and youth, but also basics for adults. And then we'll show you some specific exercises you can use to improve specifically for your sport, for Sambo. Don't worry if you see today many exercises. We will send you all the exercises at the end, so you don't have to write down every exercise you see or something new. So we'll send it to you. And at the end, of course, there will be time if you have some questions and so on. And we have also our friends from FIAS Federation who could translate it if there's a problem with communication, so don't worry. So I just open the first presentation. Here we are. Taro?
Yes.
Okay. So like last time, we talked about the big picture of the body of performance injury prevention. Today, I want to go through some basic principles we talked about already, but then go deeper into topic about performance, Sambo, and so on. So it's not always about performance in sport. We have, of course, athletes in Sambo who suffer from pain, mostly back pain. So what does the classic physiotherapy do everywhere around the world? Oh, it hurts, so we do a little massage, we put something warm on it, and you should be fine. This is okay, but like this, we treat only symptoms. We don't treat the main problem. So the symptoms come always back. So we know the only thing that helps to prevent those things is the active training of the structures. There is no other method to release pain in the structures. We have to train them. It's the training therapy, it's the sport therapy, and it's also the preparation for performance. We have to prepare the structures for the activity. And everything we do starts in the center of the body. If the core stability, mobility, and everything doesn't work, you will not be able to perform well on the upper extremities and the lower extremities. So if you just think about techniques in Sambo that are not working well, as a coach, you might think, yeah, we have to train the technique more and more to throw your opponent more and more. But maybe the main problem is in the basics, that there is a lack of stability in the center, that they are not able to transfer the forces specifically in the technique. So that's why it's important to have a clear focus on the basic physical preparation first, before you check the specific technique in a sport. The core itself, not only like we talk about six-pack, but the core around the body is not only important to prevent back pain and injuries, but also very important for the transfer of forces. Means when you think about the javelin athlete, if he would have a great technique, but he would have some weaknesses in the center of the body, then he would not manage to transfer the forces for the throw. So it's also in daily life, of course, picking up a box. So the core is very important for prevention of injuries, for performance, and for performance mainly as a transfer of forces between the legs and arms, and also the other way around, from arms to the legs. So if we have a weak center, the whole system is not working. So we have to understand that the focus in training, physical preparation, is not always to strengthen one individual muscle. The goal is to train movements, and this is the definition of functional training. So it makes not much sense to build up a big bicep, because functionally in sambo other sports, the bicep isn't used to work together with the other muscles. So it's the goal to work on movements. Sometimes to work on one individual muscle is of course important, maybe after operation of the knee, when the quadriceps is gone because there was the operation, then we start to activate one single muscle with electrostimulation, maybe with physiotherapy. But then as soon as possible, we try to integrate other structures and make it more functional, make it 3D. So this is the goal, to work on functional movements and not only focus on individual muscles. When we talk about core, the center of the body, it's not only about stability and strength, it's also about the mobility and flexibility. So if somebody, imagine, has a stiff spine, very stiff, and maybe in a round back, he will not be able to throw the opponent to the back, because the limitation is because of the bad mobility. So to perform well in sports or to stay healthy for the future, we need two things: mobility, flexibility, stability, and strength. These two things belong together. We cannot say we just have to strengthen the muscles, we have to be strong and stable, we have to have a six-pack. It will not help in the performance. We need a great balance between the mobility and the stability part. So the mobility of the spine is also very important. And it's not only the spine. So the core, if the core has to work well, we need mobility of the spine up here, and we need also flexible mobile hip joints. So these are all structures, they belong together. We'll come to that today in the practical part, where you see exercises for each part that we need for performance. So then after the mobility part, we talk about the stability part. And here the main goal is the balance of the muscles. And we always see the problems of gyms around the world, where they focus only on some sit-up variations to have a nice six-pack. This has nothing to do with functional stability. If there's a six-pack or not, it doesn't stabilize the spine. It doesn't help too much for the transfer of the forces. We need a nice balance between the front muscles, the back muscles, and the side muscles. So there should be a balance. So when you train an athlete or your group during the warm-up to integrate core exercises, then don't say, okay, today is Monday, today we focus on the ventral muscles, on the stomach. This is not a good approach. Better is to keep the balance during one training. That means that the first exercise you choose is for the ventral system. The second exercise is for the back muscles. The third exercise is for the side muscles. And the fourth, maybe something complex combined. So during the training or the warm-up, you work on the whole muscle balance. And this is important. When we talk about for example, about the ventral core, it doesn't mean, as I said before, just the six-pack down here. Ventral core means it's the whole muscle chain. It starts with the arm going over the shoulder through the core to the leg. So it's the whole muscle chain that we are working on. The more muscles you integrate into the exercises, the better, the more functional. The same thing for the back, the same thing for the side. So try to think in 3D, try to think functional, and try to keep the balance of the core stability. So when you hear how important core training is, it doesn't mean that from now on you have to do core training every day for 2 hours. It's not about how long you do it, it's about the frequency. So from the sport medicine point of view, you should work on core every single training, a part of the warm-up. So we are talking about 5, 10, 15 minutes maybe, but it should be integrated into every training as a prevention and also later for performance. So not to say, okay, you are weak in the core, to now you will do every weekend because you work a lot. On the weekend, you do 3 hours of core training. Makes no sense. Better every single day, 10 minutes. So the frequency is more important than the duration of one session. And with the core, Also, the pelvis is an important part for the transfer of the forces. So if the stability of the pelvis is bad, so the side muscles, not the big glutes in the back, but the side glutes, gluteus medius, it's called, the small buttocks muscle is weak. Every time you walk or stand one leg, the pelvis falls down. Means you will not be able to stabilize the core and not also your leg. So if you have weak abductors, this will affect the whole position. You will have side flexion of the spine and your knee will go to the inside. Now imagine sambo throws where you are on one leg. If it will never work, the athletes will maybe get injured or they will not perform well, because not that the technique is bad of sambo, but because there are the basics missing, like here, the pelvis stability. So to talk about a good functioning center of the body, there are more things integrated. It's the spine mobility, it's the core stability, it's the pelvis stability, it's also the mobility of the hip joint. So these are all the things that we need to perform well in sports. If we don't work on pelvis stability, then you see how many problems can occur. Problems with the hip joint, problems with the facet joint in the spine. Not because the spine has a problem. The main problem is because the basics are missing, because the pelvis is not stable. So that's why we try always to say, go a few steps back, see the big picture. Try to work on the basics first, then put them together, and then you can perform specifically for sambo or other sport. So it's important to understand the main basics that are necessary for performance. And if you don't work on it, if you keep the pelvis falling down, at the end, you will get muscle imbalance, and of course, you will have no performance. So again, the coaches, when they see that, they are like, okay, we do some video analysis of the throw and we try to improve the technique. But this is maybe the wrong approach. Again, sometimes it helps to go a few steps back and to work on the basic skills that we need: mobility, flexibility, stability, strength, and mainly in the center of the body. We have exercises on one side, but it's important for every coach, of course, to define the exercise with the training methods. You have to say how long is one exercise, how long you do one exercise, how many sets, how fast, and so on. This depends on the training goal. If you have young athletes who are beginners, of course, you will not work too fast, because if they work too fast, they will compensate for sure. So at the beginning, you will work more slow, static, isometric. If you go more into performance, then of course you will build it up more specifically for sambo, more explosive and so on. So it depends on the level, it depends in which phase you are. But don't forget, if you see a lot of exercises, for example, today from us, or you see some cool exercises always on YouTube from America, oh, that's a great exercise, this is a great exercise. The things that they show you is just a movement. This is fine to see a movement, but to define the movement, it's up to you to say how long, how fast, or maybe you put it apart, the exercise, because it's too complex for your athlete at the beginning. So don't think just about exercises, you have to think also about the methods, and these two things define a training plan. Normally, when we work with young athletes, like in a preparation, injury prevention, we normally use the classic strength endurance, means exercises with the own body, like here, and the duration 20-30 seconds, maybe 2 sets. This is the classic stabilization training. Once you go more specifically into sambo, then of course you will have extra load, extra weights, you will have more explosiveness, you will have more speed, and so on. So it depends again in which phase you are, and of course the goal is quality. If you see if somebody has a good quality, stay with that and build it up. If you see that somebody has a bad quality, he compensates and so on, then you have to think about how can you go a few steps down. Maybe you change the movement, the exercise, maybe you change the training method. So it's up to you, but don't forget to have a training plan. It's not only the exercise, but also the training method that defines the plan. Some examples, so you understand the main principles of core training in practice. Here, we talked about transfer of forces. If the core and the pelvis would be weak, unstable, then of course, like discus, it's a great example. They would not be able to throw the disc very far. So it's all about transfer of the forces from the legs to transfer it through the core to the arm to the discus. So transfer of forces, very important. And for that, we need a stable core and a stable pelvis. When you see this exercise, this is something we see like in a healthy training session for ladies and so on, which is great. But many coaches try to bring some new variations into it, like here, to put the ball between the knees. So they squeeze it and activate some ventral muscles. The idea is good, but when we see the big picture, for example, if you have an athlete who is from the beginning, who has a bad posture, let's say he's not the upright person, but his spine is around already, his shoulders are here, the head is in the front, the classic bad posture of the body, then I would not give anything between the knees so he activates more and more to the inside. If somebody has a bad posture, try to activate the structures to the outside. Means if you want to integrate into core some more activities, so maybe put a TheraBand around the knees so they activate to the outside. So it depends also on the posture of the athlete. If somebody has a bad posture, don't let him work only bench press, pulling to the inside, having something between the knees, but think the opposite way. Activate him to the outside. Here, very important to understand, this is what we will go through today for you as coaches for Sambo. You see many exercises lying on the mat, which is okay. You can use them as a warm-up, as a prevention, and so on. So when we have young athletes, when we have athletes with bad core stability, then we go on a lower level where we have great quality of movement, lying positions, which is okay. But once they get better, we have to think about the transfer to the specific position. Means an athlete who is running, sprinting, he needs to strengthen specifically in standing and then in movement. So just to do some sit-ups on the mat will not help him to perform well in sprint. So also for you, for Sambo, we'll come to that in a minute, you have different positions in your sport. So you have to integrate those positions into the training and not to say just do a few planks and you should be fine for the core stability. No, you have to integrate different positions and so on. So let's talk about Sambo and the importance of core stability. It's not only to reduce back pain in future. We'll start with the beginning of the fight, where it's all about grip and control. This is where it starts, where the core is active, reactive core stability. If somebody is weak in the core and the pelvis, of course he will get controlled with the grip. So it starts already with the gripping, where you need a great pelvis stability and core stability to react very fast and to work against the opponent. So this is where it starts. It's not about that the athlete has a bad technique. Maybe he can't even get to his grip because of lack of core stability. So we need a lot of reactivity even by just gripping. Here what we see, Sambo, we don't stand only on 2 feet. You see different techniques on one leg. So here you see how important it is, the transfer of the forces, leg, pelvis, and core, that you can't do just some sit-ups on the ground. You have to train core for Sambo in standing, and you have to integrate also dynamic, explosive core exercises on one leg, because you need that. We need a step-by-step approach to the specific position, to the specific movement. So these are 2 things. The one thing that I talk about are the basics. You work at the beginning with young athletes. But then when the basics are working well, mobility, flexibility, stability, strength, coordination, proprioception, all these basics are working, then we build it up more and more specific. So then you go to the specific positions, like in standing, on one leg, not static, but you work more explosive and dynamic, reactive, and so on. So these are the things we will show you then with practical exercises. Also here, when you go into throws on the knee position, same thing. You will need to work on the specific core stability, dynamic, explosive, reactive in kneeing positions. So again, it will not be enough to be just on the ground, do some sit-ups, do some planks, and thinking, yeah, he'll be fine with Sambo. It helps if you provide step-by-step approach exercises in different positions, like in the kneeing. We'll come to that later. Also groundwork in Sambo to protect your arm and so on. You see what we have here. We have for the core, for the center of the body, we have the static strength that we need to protect, but you need also dynamic reactivity. So you need the core stability in every position, in standing on 2 feet, on 1 foot, in kneeling position, on the ground. So that's why Sambo is very complex, which is a great sport, but you need also to train complex positions to prepare the athletes well for the sport, to perform better, because again, it's not always the bad technique that they have, that they cannot perform well, but sometimes it's a lack of the basics. Just a simple training example, how we work with athletes when we want to train them at the core. So let's imagine we have a young athlete who does javelin throw. So we want to prepare him well because in javelin, he needs also great core stability for the transfer of the forces. So when we do a screening with him to test his core stability, we see with the numbers 5 is really bad, 1 is very good. So we see he's not very good in the core after the test. So he's very weak in the side core. He's not very well in the ventral core. So this is a classical picture that we are sure that we know why he cannot throw the javelin far. Not because of the technique, but because he's weak in the core and he cannot provide the optimal transfer of the forces. So when we see that, we have to think about, okay, I choose exercises on what kind of level. If he's really weak, of course, I cannot choose the most difficult exercises. I have to adapt it to the level where he is. We are thinking also about the type of muscle contraction. On what level is he? Do we work slow? Do we do the exercises fast, explosive, depending on the level of the athlete? You also think about, will I choose or integrate training equipment? Yes or no? If somebody is really weak in the center of the body, then I would recommend not to integrate any training equipment at the beginning. First, they should be able to control their own body with high quality, and then step by step to integrate some additional equipment, but not from the beginning. And also depending on the age, on the level, and so on. And then also think about the starting position. So he's a javelin thrower. So of course, because he's weak, he can work in lying positions at the beginning, but because he throws javelin, we will of course bring some exercises also specifically into standing. So then you think about the methods I was talking about. So for this example, let's say we take 3 exercises per muscle group. The duration, as I said, is classic strength endurance, 30 seconds, some recovery, and maybe 2 to 3 sets. So the plan could be like this for the javelin thrower. We have the lying positions, but we have already the transfer to the standing. So the first exercise he would do would be for the ventral core, then for the dorsal core, lateral core, and combined. Ventral, dorsal, lateral combined, ventral, dorsal, lateral combined. So this could be like a program for the javelin thrower. What we have integrated already the specific positions he needs in standing. We have integrated already some dynamic reactive movements because he has dynamics and so on. So these are the things you have to think about before you start to do exercises. What level do we have? So what kind of movements do we choose? And also, how do I define the exercises? How long do we do it? How fast do we do it? What positions do we use? And so on. That's why today I will show you, because you are coaches and what's important for you, to see methodical steps, because then you have an idea what you can choose for your athlete. So we will start with lying positions, and then we move on step by step into standing, and then dynamic, reactive, explosive. This is the idea of the practical session. And very short for you also, as we talked about the core as a center of the body, not only for performance, but also as injury prevention. So many athletes suffer from the classic lumbago, the back pain. So they have the pain in the lower back, and of course, old school, okay, a little massage, hot shower, and it will be fine. We know this is not the best solution. It's just to work on the symptoms. So what does happen? It's the structures can be irritated. It can be the muscle, ligaments, and so on. So for us, we know that there is something wrong because the structures are overused. They are not managing to stabilize it. So what can it be? The muscles can be weak. This is the one thing. It can be also the pelvis that is weak, that every time he walks, the pelvis falls down and his spine is moving too much. Maybe it's also that his feet are completely flat, because if the feet are completely flat, they lose the optimal leg axis. And of course, this has an effect on the pelvis and the core. That's why if you have someone who suffers frequently on back pain, check with a physio or a doctor not to have the side only on the back, on the spine, but also to check, okay, how is the pelvis stability? How are the feet? Are they flat or not? And so on, to have the big picture. And then you will know more what you can work on, what you can integrate into the training to prevent these problems. So the symptoms are they have pain, of course, in all kind of structures. But this is already like, these are the symptoms they have, but the main problem can be something else. So what do we do with athletes that have back pain? Of course, loosening the contractures means when somebody has pain, the body contracts as a protection. This is the typical thing. So to massage it, to release it is fine. But many physios, they do the massages and then they stop. Okay, go back to your fight. So this is just the beginning. Then after loosening, we have to check if his position of the pelvis, the spine is correct, because if he has really bad position, of course, the structures will be irritated every time. So we have to see the big picture. How is the position of the body? Then, of course, a big topic would be the stability and strength of the core. And that should be part, as I said, of every single training session, as a part of the warm-up, 5 to 10 minutes. And as a prevention, to have less problems with the back, we should check the mobility of the hip joint and the mobility of the upper spine. If these two structures are tight, are stiff, then what will the athlete do? He will always compensate through the lower back. So as a prevention, check the hip mobility, check the spine mobility, or just integrate those exercises frequently into the training sessions. So you cover the big picture. So here's an example of a patient that we tested who had back pain. And when we tested him, this was the typical picture of a patient that the back pain occurred because he had everything that he could do to provide this back pain. So what we see here, first of all, he was really stiff in his spine. So he had no extension at all. So every time he extended the spine, nothing happened here. Everything happened down in the lower back. So this was the first thing. Also, his hip joints were little stiff. And then when we checked the stability, we saw that it was lateral, very weak. He was in the pelvis, very weak. So we can imagine this patient with back pain can go to a physiotherapist for massages. This is nice, but we will not solve the problem. To solve the problem with this patient is very simple. Mobilize the spine, mobilize the hip, stabilize the core, and stabilize the pelvis. And then the center is covered. So these are the things we will also work now in the practical that I will show you. Mobility of the upper spine, mobility of the hip joint, core stability. I will show you methodical steps in the several positions to standing, dynamic, explosive, what you will need in Sambo. And then with this big picture, you can be sure that you provide a good basis for your athletes as a prevention of injuries and also for performance. So this was just a little overview of the main principles, how important it is, what the core is about. It's not just the spine, it's about the upper part, it's about the hip, it's about the pelvis, and so on. And now I would like to show you methodical steps, how you could work on these structures. Again, we will show you many exercises. Don't worry, we will send all of these exercises to you. So then you can try them out for the whole day if you want to be mobile and stable. So I will show you step by step. So we start with the spine, mobility of the spine. I want to start very low, very basic, and then go to more and more specific, because like this exercise for rotation of the spine, it's not just that, okay, we think this is an exercise for an 80-year-old patient, a grandpa who has back pain, but also if you have a young athlete in Sambo who suffers from back pain. What did we hear? If there's back pain, all those muscles and structures, they contract as a protection. So you can, of course, massage the muscles to release the tension, or this is even a better system. With easy movements, the muscles that are contracted, they have to work, they contract and release. So with easy movements like here, you provide a better blood circulation in the structures and you release actually the hardening of the structures. So it's not only to provide better mobility, but here to release the pain because you release the tension of the structures. So these exercises, if somebody has really back pain in a training, I just let him mobilize a little bit more, and then we'll see after 3-4 minutes how he feels. Maybe he can come back to the training. Here the same thing, where you integrate the whole spine with the counter rotation of the head. Again, the goal here is to mobilize the spine if there's a back pain, to release the contraction by blood circulation, by activating, releasing the muscles. We are still on a very low level. Very effective, high quality exercise for the thoracic spine is on the side, because when the patient or the athlete is lying, we have a good control of the quality. So the pelvis here is not moving. So we have the movement just right here in the upper spine that we want to have without compensation down here. So we don't want to mobilize the upper spine and note that it will compensate anyways over the lower back. This is not the goal. We want to control the lumbar spine. We want to control the spine down here, and we want to mobilize only up here. That is important as a prevention for optimal performance. The same thing, do you have an athlete that has really strong back pain, the muscles are tight, and he's in the training, he says, I can't train because it hurts so much? Go even a step lower. The low-level exercises are great for, again, activating the structures and increasing the blood circulation. Give them something like a water bottle for drinking under the arm, extended arm, and just let them rotate. Even this movement, again, activates the muscles very gently, provides better blood circulation, and releases the tension and releases a little bit the pain. So these are possible solutions. where you don't need a physio or a doctor, just by easy movements to release, reduce the pain and release the tension of the structures. And then we go to classical, then we can increase rotation with extension, again with control of the pelvis. So these are exercises you can also use to open up the spine to the extension and rotation. Very simple movements. You can use these exercises because they are really slow and so on. You could use these exercises at the end of the training. After sambo session, instead of just static stretching, we could do easy slow motion mobility exercises combined with stretching. So it's up to you where you integrate these movements. And then classically, from yoga, other systems, Pilates, classic, the cat and cow mobility. But what we see that the athlete still compensates a lot through the lower back, which is not the goal. We want to mobilize just the upper part. So in this case, we would adapt the position where is less compensation. We put the hands closer to the knees. So this way, there would be more mobility on the upper spine. So by changing the position of the hands, you can choose what parts of the spine are being mobilized. And then if the athlete really compensates over the pelvis, lower back, then we can go to the next step, that we put one leg to the front, and with the hip flexion on one side here, the pelvis is blocked. So they can't go into the extension. So here we are sure that there is no compensation down here for the extension, and the mobility happens up here where we want it. So this is a better quality, that we know we're mobilizing more in the upper spine and not compensating through the lower back. So but just by changing easy positions, you'll see you can get a good quality of movement. So the good quality is always the big goal. If somebody compensates, then we have to think about, okay, how do I go a little back so I provide the quality and not compensation. And the same thing we can do also in that position with rotation for the spine. So these are just activating movements. Again, if an athlete would have back pain, then I would do these exercises maybe for 20-30 seconds just to provide a better blood circulation in the structures, release the tension in an active way. And then if we really go into high quality extension of the spine, then equipment like a foam roller is very, very effective. So here we see lower back under control. The extension happens only in the upper spine. And then you can also change the position of the foam roller, but these exercises are very effective. You can do it like he did it, extension and flexion, or you just stay in the extension for 5-10 seconds and then back to active. These are just variations. You as a coach will find out what method is the best for your athlete. You have to ask him about the feedback, what do you feel more, and so on, and then adapt, of course, the method where we have the most effect. If he would still compensate through the lower back, then we could adapt again by fixing the pelvis by more hip flexion of the wall, control the lower back, and here again we work just on the upper thoracic spine extension. Again, it's a very important topic as a prevention in the big picture of core training. Thoracic spine. And then we can go already step by step to standing positions. Maybe here at the wall. Again, one leg is in the front, so we note that the rotation doesn't happen in the lower back, and we rotate, mobilize the rotation only in the upper spine. Imagine doing the same exercise in standing. If we would rotate just like this, left and right, what are the classic warm-up movements? if somebody is stiff up here, you can imagine by doing left and right rotation, they would do everything in the lower back, lower spine. And this is what we don't want at the beginning. We want a high quality rotation of the upper spine. That's why it's good to support them first with positions where we have one leg in the front to control the pelvis. And the same thing we can do, of course, not only rotation, but also rotation, extension, just through movements. These are movements we use in sport therapy a lot for high quality mobilization of the spine. Again, you can use it as a movement if somebody has back pain to just activate the structures, or long term, of course, to improve the mobility of the thoracic spine. And then we go for sure in standing positions, like here also one foot in the front with the hip flexion to have more control over the lower back. And we see the mobility of the extension happens just up here. And this is what we want. Quality, mobilizing the thoracic spine without creating any more pain or irritation of the lower back. We want to control here, but we want to mobilize up there. So that's why those variations that I showed you now are very important, because you need variations to adapt it to your athlete. Because maybe the one exercise he cannot do because he's compensating, then you have to try with a different one. So it's very individual, but it's important to have enough variations. So the first step is done. The spine is mobile. We go to the next step we thought about. To prevent back pain and to have great performance in sport, in sambo, through the core, we need also mobile hip joint. So the hip joint is also very important. Classic, what we see in track and field, athletics, is the classic hip swing. But what we see here, this is actually a judo guy who is very stiff in the hip. We see he's swinging the leg to the front and back, but he's compensating a lot through the lower back. So if he does this exercise for a few weeks, the hip joint will not get better, but what he will have maybe is more back pain because he was compensating every time with the lower back. So again, also here, we need more quality. Quality control could be to not work explosive, but slow motion. For example, here into the flexion and extension, where we are able to focus and control the lower back. So we see that speed is actually bad for quality movement at the beginning. So if you start at a lower level with the basics like hip mobility, start to work slow, because there you can more focus on the quality of movement, like here, flexion and extension. And now I will show you some classic exercises for the hip joint where we have good quality, no compensation possible. So we start here with hip flexion and extension. Very classic, we call it in the closed chain, pushing the pelvis down and back and the other side. So very simple exercise. It's not static, it's not stretching, it's dynamic mobilization. So when it's an athlete preparing for a fight, of course, as a warm-up, he can do it more dynamic, even faster. If it's maybe you use this exercise at the end of the session where you want to combine mobility of the hip, but also a little stretching, you can do the same movement, but stay in every position for 5 seconds and then back and the other side 5 seconds. So again, the method, this is what you define. So this was flexion extension. The same thing we can do for rotation of the hip, external rotation. So the same thing, dynamic, forward and back. And again, you can use it dynamic as a warm-up, you can do it static as a cool-down, or you can combine it. So different movements, but again, the hip joint is very important. We saw some sambo pictures in the introduction that, of course, also the abduction, the flexibility is important for several throws. So here already combined two things: hip abduction, where you open your legs, and then combine it with extra movement. Like here, we combine it with flexion and extension. So we have abduction of the hip and mobilize to the front and back. When we mobilize, it can be that the athlete feels the hip joint, but it's possible he feels the adductors, the muscles, or maybe other muscle or whatsoever. At the end, it doesn't matter for us what he feels, because to increase range of motion, mobility, we need both. We need the passive structures, we need the joints, but we need also the muscles. So it doesn't matter what the athlete feels. We work, as I said at the beginning, we are working on movements and we are not focusing on one structure. So here for sure, it will not be just the hip joint that they feel. It will be also the adductors, maybe also the quadriceps and so on. So they can feel, of course, more of these structures. One very effective position to mobilize in high quality is the sitting 90-90. So the one leg in the front is 90 degrees external rotation, and in the back it's internal rotation. And in this position, we combine it with flexion extension. So again, we put the hips in a position and then combine it with extra movement. High quality. The same thing, we can combine 90-90 with spine rotation. So we have the hip in a position and we combine it with rotation of the spine. So you just combine those movements. Again, it doesn't have to be as a Sambo specific warm-up that you do here. You can say, okay, these athletes in Sambo are always very stiff. So as a prevention, you take just a part in the warm-up for 10 minutes. And with this group, you work specifically on these things, hip mobility and spine mobility. And you will see long-term, they will profit from it. The same thing here. Again, we have the abduction of the hip. Maybe they feel the muscles, maybe they feel other structures, and we combine it with flexion extension. So it's again, bring your body in a position where you feel already easy stretch or something, and then combine it with additional movements. The same thing can be also here with spine rotation as before. So we have the hip position in abduction and rotation of the spine. And the same thing, not only upright position, but going down with the body. So it's a different hip position now, 90 degrees in flexion, and combine it here. So you see in one position, you can have a lot of variation of extra positions of the hip, including the spine and so on. And you see the athlete here, she's working slow, but high quality. So it's not only the speed that's important. Yeah, Sambo is explosive. We have to mobilize very quick. You can, but at the end of a long process where you are sure that the quality of the mobilization movements is good, then you can change the training methods. But before, I would not push it to do fast movements from the beginning. And if you go then to dynamic movements like the hip, we had the hip swing. Don't forget the joints are three-dimensional joints. So you can, of course, mobilize in a 3D, like a number 8. These are exercises that mobilize it very functionally. So there are many positions, many options how to mobilize the hip joint. But first, before you start mobilizing the hip in standing, try to have the positions I showed you before, because this way you will have a better quality. So these were the two things, spine mobility, hip mobility. Now we come to the main topic, core stability. And for that, I want to show you some practical examples, methodical steps. So imagine classic, we work on sit-ups. The goal is, of course, for the ventral core to be able to bring the body completely up. So we start with position with the back to the ground. So the sit-up is a classic exercise. What if the athlete is so weak he cannot get up? What will he do? He will use some speed, because with speed he can get up. In slow motion he will not be able to do that. So before he will compensate with speed, we can start to do the movements slow. It doesn't have to be completely up from the beginning. And what's important when we work in sit-up positions? First of all, to be clear, sit-ups are not the best functional exercises for the core. Better is to work with planks. We will come to that after. But it doesn't mean that sit-ups are really bad. Of course, you can integrate them. But if you integrate them, it's important to integrate also very important points for the quality. So what we have here, when we do the sit-ups, first you see the toes are up. Because if your toes are up, you get more tension in the whole lower leg instead of having the feet relaxed on the ground. So by having the tension here, you get more tension in the legs. The same thing, if you have your hands under tension, you get the whole tension over the arms. We have the shoulders and the head always in the air. So the whole body is on tension. I would not work with sit-ups hands behind the head because the people push the head forward and use some speed. Keep the tension over the arms, keep the tension over the legs, and then work slow. This way you get more quality. And then again, if you activate the ventral system, try to change the position of the hip joint. For example, we can do it here with 90 degrees hip flexion. The same thing. We have tension here, tension here. So we have different hip position. We can also change it to asymmetric positions, which is, for example, here, one in extension, one in flexion. So this is already more functional. And this is one of the important steps in progression in core training, to go from symmetric exercises to go later into asymmetric exercises. Means you are not always working like that, but you try to bring the body into asymmetric positions to work functionally on diagonal muscle chains. So like here, asymmetric positions through the pelvis and the legs. And of course, then you can make it more dynamic, functional, asymmetric, change the legs, and so on. So if you do sit-ups, try to integrate different hip positions, because if you change the hip position, the activation of the ventral core structures are different, of course. So that's why not classic always 90 degrees, but different ones. The same thing can be, for example, also in hip abduction, to work here. So when you say, okay, for all your athletes during the warm-up, we do some sit-up variations, you can say, okay, let's start 10 straight, 10 asymmetric, leg to the outside, 10 times like this. So you can change the positions during one exercise, of course, to make it even more interesting. So check that you have always the tension with your arms, with your legs, with your feet, and change the position of the hip joint. Then you can, of course, also combine structures like the ventral core combined with side core muscles. So different exercises. Here again, the toes are in the air, so we have tension in the front and activating the lateral core. These are all variations when we talk about sit-ups. Then important also for Sambo, for some of your throws and movements, that you don't always activate from the top, but also from the bottom of your ventral muscles. So the classic exercise we know is to raising the hips up and down to activate the lower ventral core. This is nice, but again, this is just the first step of many methodical steps that you could use. So let's have a look what kind of variations we can have. The first one can be to go already into a little bit more asymmetry. So we have the tension, the shoulders are in the air, and the pelvis goes left and right. So we are not working symmetric anymore, but we are going again into asymmetry. That's one of the principles, as I said, asymmetry. Of course, we can also do even more asymmetry by changing the position of the feet of the pelvis, one leg over the other. And now we have a complete asymmetric position and activating the lower ventral core. And these are more functional movements than just to do always straight and symmetric. So play with the movements you're using already, but try to find ways to make it step by step asymmetric. And then we can even go to more asymmetry again, like here, more asymmetry, raising the pelvis up and down. These are already high level exercises. If you want, after the seminar, you can try this one. I'm not sure if you manage to do 10 or 20, if you do good quality. So even if you train a group of athletes, let's say you have 10 Sambo guys, and of course, in a group of 10, you will never have the same level of the core, because we talk about core now. You will have at least 3 different levels, even in a group of 10 people. It doesn't mean for the coach that he has to do 3 complete different exercises when you work with them, but very simply, everybody does the same movement. You just adapt the position of the legs. We showed you right before. Both feet, symmetric is easier, one leg over the other, asymmetric or even more asymmetry. So just adapt the position for all the group, but you know this one are stronger, he is weaker. Everybody does the same, activating the same muscle structures, but just changing some positions of the feet. That's why it's important to have a lot of variations to adapt to a certain, for example, a group. The same thing when you activate the core for the diagonal ventral core muscles. Classic exercise, okay, to activate the core. But here also we can make a transfer to asymmetric exercises. So even if you want to go even on a higher level, you don't use a ball, you can have a kettlebell whatsoever, more weight, and just work asymmetric. So it's important, as I said, to go from symmetry to asymmetry and to integrate as many structures as possible. So when we talk about core training, it doesn't mean we should feel just the core, nothing else. I want to integrate the legs, also the arms, the whole body. The more muscles are activated, the better. So that's why we are talking about functional training and not isolated muscle training. So the next step, for example, could be methodical step to activate more structures for the ventral core, that you push with one hand against the opposite knee. So you have a pressure here. So this diagonal is already in the core activated. And additionally to it, we work with upper extremity of the other side. So this diagonal is working dynamic, concentric, and the other one isometric, diagonal muscle chain for the ventral core. We could also go for the next step to integrate not the arm, but more the leg, to keep again the diagonal pressure and to work just over the lower extremity without changing the position of the lower back. So the whole ventral system is active. This diagonal is isometric and the other one is concentric, eccentric, dynamic. That means it's becoming more and more functional. If you want to go even on the next step in the functionality, then we can go, of course, to a high level exercise here, diagonal pressure. So here we have the isometric contraction for one diagonal, and the other diagonal is working concentric, eccentric, without losing the pressure here. Very high level, intense exercise, very functional. The whole body is active. So you see how many variations we found already just for sit-ups. It's about methodical steps, it's about variations, but if you have a lot of these steps and these ideas, then you can adapt your training, integrate more variations into the training, and the people will adapt more and more if you bring more variations. If they do the same for the whole year, of course, there will not be optimal adaptation. So that's why many variations are very important. We come to the next position, before we go to the, so we are still with the back to the ground. So classic, this is now for the dorsal system, for the dorsal back. Classic to stabilize the pelvis, not to compensate and just to extend. And what is interesting here, this is again a low level exercise, but we've seen many top athletes from explosive sports like Sambo who do everything very fast, and with the speed, of course, they compensate. So even high level athletes, they are not able to stabilize the pelvis during this exercise. They fall down a little bit because here we work slow motion, we work on quality. So even if you see a very simple low level exercise, it doesn't mean that you don't need it for your athletes because they are fighting on a high level. Check it out if they are able to stabilize it in the right way. So we are always looking for quality. The next methodical step could be combining with flexion extension. So these are again step-by-step approaches, useful for athletes who are really weak in the dorsal core and so on. So don't forget, these low-level exercises I'm showing you now are sometimes also very important. We come later to the high-level exercises, but this is important to understand the whole methodical step, not only to work on the highest level, explosive TRX, kettlebells, and so on, but to know how to provide a high level, high quality in these exercises. Here also, pelvis is stable, and now to move the leg to the outside. So this is again, looks easy. Many top athletes are not able to stabilize the pelvis in a good way. They fall down. And this is actually one of our screening tests when we test athletes to check just the basic global stability of the dorsal core by bridging and moving the leg to the outside. And you will get enough information about the coordination and stability of the core. And of course, not only lying position, but you can move then to the same thing with hands on the ground to integrate more shoulder blade stability and the upper extremity. So you can adapt the positions to have more structures integrated. And this is the goal. So it's just little change of the position and we reach a different level. And the same thing, of course, can be here for the abduction and back. So we are training movements, but with the position, we are getting already a lot of structures integrated. And then, of course, if the athletes manage a good quality of the movements, then we can integrate additional training equipment, like the instability of the therapy ball. So then integration of material is good, but not always from the beginning. Because if somebody is weak, we can be sure that they will compensate and not give the quality that we want. And then we can, of course, go to the next level, for example, here, to train complex movements, dorsal core plus rotation of the whole body, keeping the buttocks in the air. So we have more structures integrated. We're still working on quality. Everything is stable. And then, because we are still in the position with the back to the ground, we could also integrate reactivity, which is of course important for Sambo. So one of the exercises, very simple, to get reactivity, stability, mostly for the ventral core, to let one leg go, and the athlete has to stabilize through the ventral core. Of course, the dorsal is also active, but the reactivity is for the ventral. So then you build up step by step with partners, with more reactivity and so on. But first, don't forget that the quality, the basics are important. Just try to be able to stabilize your own body in a good position, additional movements, and then step by step, you build it up into standing and dynamics We will come to that shortly. So this was the position with the back to the ground. We come to the next position, the stomach to the ground. So here also, when you work on the mostly dorsal system, shoulder blades and the core, dorsal core, check some things for the better quality. Again, toes are on the ground. We have the dorsiflexion of the toes. So this way we have more activity of the whole lower extremity. The glutes, the buttocks should be activated, active, because if it's not activated, the people compensate too much through the lower back. So we want activation of the glutes, toes down here, so the legs are on tension, the buttocks on tension, and there is no compensation of the lower back. And then it doesn't matter what kind of movements you are doing with your arms, as long as you have the control of the pelvis and the legs. The whole muscle chain is active. And then we can already go to more asymmetric positions, like here, dorsal muscles, and combine it with lateral movement. So again, these are just variations how you can activate the dorsal core with activated glutes and the toes on the ground to have tension over the lower extremities also. And then, very important, the next step, to go to asymmetric positions, as I said, because we test many athletes around the world and we see that mostly when we check them from the back, checking the back muscles, we always see, because of preferred side for fighting or from the sport javelin, they have muscle disbalances in the back. So one side is stronger than the other side. So just to work symmetric would not help to adapt the balance. That's why we need asymmetric positions. Asymmetric positions like here, one leg flexed, and again, buttocks activated, toes down, and to work through the upper extremity. So this asymmetry activates now more the left side of the core. So integrate those asymmetric positions. Then you can go further for the asymmetry, raising the upper body up and down with the asymmetric position of the pelvis and the legs. Methodically, we could go further to combine not only extension, but also with rotation with the asymmetric position here. So symmetric first, that's good, but if there's the quality, then move on to asymmetric positions, because asymmetric we don't have only in sport, we have that also in daily life. And then for the next higher level exercises with lateral flexion. So for me, this exercise is not possible, because what I'm missing here to perform this exercise is my hip mobility and the spine mobility. So you see, if there's a lack of mobility, then the whole movement is not working. So that's why it's important to understand it's not only about stabilizing. If I see someone here doing this exercise and suffering to get up, maybe the problem is not the stability, but maybe the main problem is the mobility of the spine, maybe the mobility of the hip joint. And then we can go to next methodical steps with more dynamics in asymmetric position. So whatever you do with the arms, you can throw balls to your partner against the wall in the asymmetric position. It's up to you. But it's important to understand the methodical steps. And again, one more possibility is to do dynamics, and in the asymmetric position, you move your body to the left and right. So it can become more and more functional. More and more structures are integrated. So these are exercises in lying position. Now we come already to planks. Of course, we can start with planks in a small way, like flexed knees, flexed hip, and just start to raise the foot and try to focus on pelvis and core stability without compensation. So this is just to check the quality, because I will not go to flat plank if they're not able to stabilize it here. Because if I go to flat plank, they will for sure compensate through the back, and they might have more problems than what I want to accomplish. So quality first. So when we go to plank, several variations. Classic, holding plank, and focus on the pelvis stability. I prefer to have a little pyramid here. So not to have in one line the plank, but a little pyramid, because if the people do it flat completely and they are weak or they are getting tired, then they will compensate again through the lower back. So to have the buttocks just a little bit higher is a better position for prevention of back pain and for the quality. So keep little pyramid, which is good to keep the quality, and try to stabilize the pelvis. Now we can go to more functional movements. The plank to integrate also movements from the upper extremity. So if some athletes tell me during this exercise, I feel my chest and shoulder, so what? We are trying to train the whole ventral muscle chain. So we want to activate the arm, the shoulder, the chest, the core, the legs. Everything should be integrated. So it doesn't matter what they feel, we are working on movements. So dynamic plank. And then we can, of course, go step by step to asymmetry. First step, same thing, with one leg in the air, with the focus on straight spine, on no compensation of the pelvis. Once they manage it, we can go even further, more to asymmetric positions. Now we come to higher level exercises, which are already great for Sambo, when we are not talking about basics, but now already a little higher level for the ventral core. Asymmetric movement through the legs, and we have the ventral core, we have the chest, we have the shoulder, the whole body is integrated. So this is functional core training, and not only to think just to hold the plank static or just to do sit-ups is enough. We need to think more functional. The next step could be step-by-step approach. Do the plank with extended leg, make it even more asymmetric to integrate even more the hip joint and so on. More asymmetry. And then if the athlete is still good enough, after a while, we can go to the next methodical step to make it even a little bit harder. Asymmetry through the arms and the legs. So this is very functional core training for the whole ventral system. We are not talking about six-pack. Six-pack is just a little part of the whole muscle chain. So we have to think a little further with the big picture. So here, asymmetry, arm and leg. And then we can, of course, integrate also more rotation to the inside, not only outside. So you can go inside with the leg, you can go outside with the leg with the extra movement. So then you can create more functional, complex movements. And this is the best functional core training you can have, where the whole body is integrated. And then, of course, as before, you can integrate training equipment. If the quality before was working well, starting with the ball to stabilize the ventral core, going even further forward and so on. So we start slow because we want the quality. And then methodically, of course, with that, we go to asymmetric positions. Like here, we can again combine the ventral core, unstable, with extra movement of the leg and slowly back. Later, you can do it even faster, dynamic, fast, however, but at the beginning, it's all about quality. So if you want quality, don't work too fast. And then functional core. The asymmetry is coming through the upper extremity, making big circles, so very intense training for the ventral core, functional. So these are great functional exercises for ventral core. So don't think that sit-ups are enough. This is what makes athletes better. to integrate the whole body into a movement, all structures. And when you work on core, you can make it also in the gym, combined, not only for individual muscles for pulling, like that is important in sambo, but also combining it like a core exercise, static over the lower extremity and working dynamic over the upper extremity. So this is not only pulling exercise for the shoulder blade and the arm, of course, it's also for the core. So you see, you can combine exercises, strengthening and core stability. And it's important that you integrate all these activities and put them together. And like with the one position, the same thing, dorsal reactivity, holding a partner, letting go. This is what you can integrate on the mat for sure. So very simple, but we should be sure that the athletes have a good basics before starting to work dynamic reactive. Because if they are weak and you let the leg go, then they will of course compensate through lower back and the effect will be more negative. That's why the step-by-step approach is very important. One more position on the side before we come finally to standing, finally to functional positions for sambo. So side positions, classic. On the side, important is to know that after we tested athletes around the whole world for the last 15 years, we see that many, even Olympic athletes, are strong in the ventral core, are okay on the back. But when we talk about side core, lateral core, that many top athletes are still weak. So this is something athletes don't like to do, or they don't train it a lot. But this is where we can still push it a little bit more into performance, to focus on the lateral core. So please don't forget to work also on the side of the core and stabilize it. So very classic exercise, just to move the legs up and down. Very clear. The toes are again on tension and we activate the lateral core. To get more activity lateral, very simple, just hold the lower arm in the air. So if the body is a little bit more flexed to the side, even in the starting position, we have more pre-activation of the lateral core. So here with the arm in the air, the lateral core is more active. The same thing, same position, just a different movement to work with the knees to the flexion and extension. So it doesn't matter what you do, what kind of movements with the lower extremities. Keep the lower arm in the air to get more pre-activation of the lateral core. So you can also go to the next step, that you move the legs to the front and back. So you see, you can put all your athletes on one side and then start, okay, legs up and down, knees to the chest, one leg to the front, second leg to the front. And you can combine those movements during your 20 or 30 seconds of activation of the lateral core. So it doesn't have to be always one movement. It can be different movements integrated into one exercise. Here you can also combine lateral core and coordination with the ventral dorsal. So coordination, stabilize, don't fall down, and move extra weight forward and back. So the ventral and dorsal core have to synchronize it, so you keep balance, and still with the holding, you have the lateral core active. So sometimes we don't need any extra weight. Sometimes it's enough to use the own arm, but this is already coordination and functional training for lateral, ventral, and dorsal combined. And then classic, what we know, lateral plank, moving hips up and down. This is a very basic exercise. Everybody does it, is good. But again, it's still not asymmetric enough, and still there are many options you can integrate to reach the next level. So instead of doing classic lateral pelvis raises, you can go to the next step to have upper leg already in the air. So this is the next level. So it's not only the core, but you have also the pelvis stability integrated. So if your athlete managed to do 50 of these classic both legs, pelvis up and down, then put him into this position and you will see that he will not manage 50, but maybe just 15 with a high quality. And also here we can integrate a different variation, not only like we had the hip extension, but this time bring the leg forward. So the same thing with hip flexion. So we change the position of the hip. We have the abductors, we have the pelvis stability integrated, and the core stability. So again, from one basic exercise everybody knows, you can make small changes to reach the next level. Again, imagine you train 10 Sambo athletes at the same time, you do warm-up, you want to do some core training, and you want to do lateral core. So you know who are maybe still too weak and so on. They get the classic exercise, side plank, both feet, and pelvis up and down. The other ones, where you know they are stronger, you can adapt these positions. So everybody is actually working on the level to improve to the next step. And not that someone is not able to manage and other ones are laughing because the exercise is too easy. So with easy changes, you can get every level. And then we can start to integrate upper and lower extremity again in the lateral plank. First, just with the arm or with extra weight to stabilize static and over the arm, make it more dynamic. The next step, after we integrate the arm, we can integrate the leg. So we stabilize the pelvis, no compensation, and we move to the flexion and extension. And then, of course, to make it more functionally, to integrate even more structures, we integrate both arms and legs. So we have arm and leg integrated. So it's not only lateral core. We see here again, we have all the structures integrated. We have the upper extremity static, we have the arm dynamic, we have the pelvis stability, we have the leg movement. So this is the definition of functional training. Integration of all the structures, not just focus on one muscle, but focus on movements, complex movements. And then the same thing can be even tougher to work with extended leg and so on. So then you can again bring it higher and higher. What is important to know that a good coach is not only a person who knows how to make things tougher and harder, but a good coach is also a person who sees compensation and knows how to go a few steps back. That's why, again, these methodical steps that I show you are very important. So you know how to go a little bit back. Another variation. So different positions, different movements, and so on. The next step is we can integrate even more the spine. So for example, having the lateral plank and working through rotation of the upper body. So now we combine the movements. It's not about stabilizing everything still, but integration of rotation of the spine. And then again, methodically, we can go to the next step. So we say, okay, one leg stays in the air. So we have even more pelvis abductors integrated and we work with the rotation. So these are all variations. And then, of course, the next step would be, if the quality worked well, then you can integrate unstable devices, extra material, and so on. But as I said before, not from the beginning. At the beginning, we try to work with the own body to keep the quality. And then if you want to integrate even more the shoulder joint for the stabilization, then you do it lateral plank on the ball with the elbow, which is a very high level exercise also for coordination, stability, and so on. So these were exercises on the side, and now we come slowly to standing positions, because as I said, it's important to make the transfer to specific positions. In Sambo, lying positions for the groundwork, good exercises, but you need also core stability in kneeling positions, in standing positions, core stability on one leg for many of the techniques that you use. So then it's important from the basics to find a nice methodical steps to the transfer to the specific sport, in this case, Sambo. If somebody, we start again low, if somebody has back pain and you want to stabilize the core muscles already specific in standing, we can do some isometric exercises, very simple to do. For example, having a TheraBand, just extending the arms to get the rotators of the core active if there's a pain. So these are like, again, sport therapy, step-by-step approaches, exercises. So isometric core stability for the rotation of the core. The same thing we could do for the lateral core of the body by moving it overhead. So we activate the lateral core. So these are, again, low-level exercises in case you have somebody with a weak core, but you want to train of already specific, and you can't do too much dynamic because it creates pain. So you can go to these isometric exercises. The same thing, we can combine more with rotation of the core and also overhead, so we get the lateral core. So you combine, again, the movements with the goal, the body is not compensating, the body stays still. So rotators and the lateral core. Then, of course, we can go step by step to dynamics. Means if you use in Sambo TheraBands or pulling devices in the gym with extra weights whatsoever, these are already very complex exercises, very effective. But everything is integrated. We see the legs, the pelvis, the core. So here we should be sure already that all the basics are working, that we have a good muscle balance in the core, that the hip joint is mobile, that the spine is mobile. Otherwise, if we don't work on the basics, we go immediately into these exercises, then the body will, of course, compensate in some ways that after weeks or months, they will have pain, they will have problems, and so on. So that's why the big picture of the basics to the specifics is important. And then from classic rotation, we go to diagonal movements, the same thing. Now it's more functional also for the throws, not to only activate the core, but to combine it with extension rotation for the throws or your body and so on. So these are step-by-step approaches. The same thing for functional core, of course, not with extension, but with flexion. So if you use kettlebells, if you use pulling devices like a TheraBand or machines to pull, whatever, if it's 3D, if it's functional, it's great. And we are already in standing positions. When we talk about core training, this is a classic exercise we use in sport therapy, asymmetric core. We have a barbell that is longer on one side. That means we have to stabilize it through the core, mostly lateral. And then we integrate extra movements like a squat. So the barbell, it's 20 kilograms. It will not have too much effect on the legs. That's too easy. But functionally, it has a big effect on the whole core pelvis system. So this is asymmetric core training, very functional. That's why it's important to understand the principles symmetry, asymmetry is also important in standing, because we are not fighting like this in symmetry, we are standing asymmetric, we are using 3D movements, so asymmetric approach is important. Asymmetry can be done also for the lateral core, that we say, okay, you stabilize your whole body in one line. I don't want compensation of the body, not a centimeter. Everything is stable and just moving lateral raises with the dumbbell. So here the line stays still. So this way, the 2-3 kilograms is not much impact on the shoulder, but in the big picture, it has a lot of impact on the whole core stability, because we are not compensating by raising what we would do normally physiologically, but here we focus on the quality to stabilize the core in one line, so we get lateral core stability. Asymmetric core training in standing. The same thing we could adapt in different hip position, because also in Sambo, you are not always standing upright, but you are fighting, your hips are flexed. So the same thing you could adapt into hip position. And again, the goal is this line stays, no compensation. So again, play with the positions, bring a lot of variations. And then for you, for the throws that we had, what we saw, bring it one leg. So this is already very functional core training. One leg. So what do we have here? We have proprioception on the foot. We have to stabilize the leg. We need pelvic stability. We need a core stability. And additionally, we use asymmetric movements with one arm. So it's very complex, very functional. And these are the exercises that brings us closer towards, for example, Sambo to the throws. Asymmetric position, one leg position, core stability, and also the whole combination of leg, pelvis, core, and arm. All structures are integrated. So this is not just one leg side raises. There's much more hidden in these movements. Very functional. And then, of course, we can go then crazy with all functional movements. For example, with kettlebell, stabilizing, going down, functional core training. With kettlebell for the shoulder, for the core, hip flexion, and so on. So these are movements you can use. But again, don't forget, before we come to these movements, we want to be sure that the basics we talked about in the lying positions, mobility, flexibility, stability, that they are working. Again, if somebody is weak, stiff, and so on, to do that exercise, you can imagine if they are stiff in the hip, they will for sure compensate too much over the spine and so on, so we create more problems. That's why the big picture, basics, transfer to standing, asymmetric, dynamic, and so on. The process, the whole process is important to understand. Another variation, 3D, one leg to activate the dorsal muscles. Up, functional core training. One leg, pelvis integrated, dorsal shoulder blade, dorsal core, and so on. Functionality, coordination. This is what we do before we go to explosive stuff, throwing balls and so on, because first we want the quality. Very classic, simple core exercise for the lateral core. Just tell your athletes to have a kettlebell and let them walk on the mat 10 times, other side. Best functional core activity for the lateral structures you can have. Very simple and functional. It's asymmetric with the steps, it's in standing, and so on. And everything you do as exercises from gymnastics and so on are actually very functional and very good to work on core stability, mobility, coordination, and so on. So what kind of movements you integrate into your warm-up to say, okay, everybody does this exercise 5 times, you activate the structures. It's a good thing also as a prevention. Before you don't do anything, just go straight to specific training. So these are still slow motion exercises in standing. Still, the transfer from symmetric to asymmetric. Now we go more to dynamics. So possible exercises for more explosiveness, dynamics, and also asymmetric, of course. So what kind of movements you could choose to now activate the structures in an explosive way? Because Sambo is explosive, we can't just do front plank and hold it. After the basics, we have to also change the training method, explosiveness and reactivity. So one possibility is to have some weights and just to work dynamic reactive. This is not only for track and field, for sprinters, but for every sport that need reactive explosive core stability. So with the movements, you activate the rotators of the core. The body has to stay still and you do your fast movements. When we go further, you can use some balls or extra weights and just work dynamic left and right. You can do it even faster. So even in Sambo, you can do a small circuit with your athletes and work on these explosive movements for core stability. The same thing you can do with different hip position. Now with hip flexion. So these are different movements. You can, of course, do the same thing maybe with one foot more in the front to have it more asymmetric. So different variations for more dynamics. If you work in the gym and you want to improve your dynamics reactivity, then you can use extra weights. The flat weights. For example, here we work on reactive ventral core, slowly down, and we have to activate the ventral core to stop the movement immediately. So this is reactive ventral core stability. By the movement that I stop up on top, I have to activate the ventral core. The same thing I can do for other structures. For example, for the dorsal, for the back muscles, starting here, up, and stopping the movement. Up, stopping the movement. So the back muscles have to activate fast. So this is a step-by-step approach to get to dynamics and reactivity. The same thing we can do, of course, like we saw before, but now individual rotation, up and stop it, slowly back, up, slowly back. So you define the weight, of course, the lighter the weight, the faster the movement. So it's not about I take 20 kilograms because then the movement is not fast enough, so you don't get the reactivity. So light weights make it actually harder because the movement is faster and you have to stop the fast movement. So this is rotation, and you can, of course, also integrate rotation with diagonal movement, up and slowly back. So now we are going again into more asymmetry during the movements. Up. So here I'm using, I think I use 5 kilograms, which is enough to get speed and to get the response from the structures. The same thing I can use also for the other movement, of course, to get the diagonal dorsal muscles. So dynamics and reactivity. And then just an idea, you can use different things, also more dynamics over the lower extremity, that you hold the weight, have some core stability, because everywhere where you choose, where you have change of directions, of course, the core has to be active. If the core is weak, then you will need forever to change direction. And it's important also in Sambo, when you fight for the grip and you activate action reaction, you need the reactivity in the core. We can also combine it with even more movement and dynamics. Up. So these are functional, explosive, dynamic core exercises. So we see the difference between what we were talking an hour ago, the sit-ups variations, which is okay, But now we are somewhere else. We are specifically in standing, in movement, in dynamics, in reactivity. That's why it's important to see the big picture. If I just show you variations of exercises from somewhere, that's nice, but then you will be confused. That's why we try to provide methodical steps after positions on the back, on the stomach, on the side, in standing, because then in your head you get a nice order of methodical steps. And don't forget, all classic traditional Olympic lifting is great core exercise, dynamic, explosive. So whatever movements you do, if you do very classic, whatever, very simple movements with extra weight, great core exercise, everything is integrated. When we move on, we can go even more into asymmetry. Perfect full body core stability, dynamic. When you have some weights, let's watch the weightlifters, great explosiveness. And then you can also not only increase it by weights, but by functionality, as I said. So maybe instead of more weights on the dumbbell, barbell, you take a dumbbell and you work more asymmetric. So this is also an option, maybe kettlebell, whatsoever. So always the transfer from symmetric to asymmetric positions. So this was the big picture: lying positions, standing, movement, dynamics. Of course, in Sambo, it's a sport where you have a partner. So also for you as coach, you could use some partner exercises as a core training. So I will show you just some classic variations that you can use for stabilization and so on. So instead of doing just, for example, sit-ups, you can combine it with squats and so on as a warm-up. So of course, this is also core training in a more playful way. But if you work in Sambo with partners, you can of course integrate several partner exercises, which is very functional. Some other variations, for example, walking over the mat, not classic holding 2 feet, but hold only 1 foot, because there we have again the asymmetry that we are looking for. So also here, transfer from symmetry to asymmetry. So whatever you use, try to go away when it's more and more specific, try to go away from the straight symmetric line, try to think about asymmetric positions. Very functional exercise as an example, where the whole body is integrated for the ventral core, shoulders up. Whatever you use with partners, there are many options that you can use. In wrestling, in judo, in sambo, there are many partner exercises. So this is actually great as a warm-up, playful way with children, youth to activate. But when you want to improve core stability long-term, you need a great structure. So you need the positions, you need the training methods, step-by-step approach. Another possibility here, core exercise for both, for the person down, for the person up. So these are more creative gymnastics, judo, wrestling exercises, we know, but it's a whole body stabilization. So again, these playful exercises are great because you activate the whole body. So you can, of course, work with a partner. And very classic, so monkey around the tree. So core training for the standing person, static, and the other one, dynamic. So again, everything you do in Sambo, great to integrate, but don't forget, just by crawling around the tree doesn't make them better in core stability in general. Maybe you have to go many steps back to work on the ventral core, dorsal core, lateral core, step by step. And from symmetry to asymmetry, maybe your focus is more not on the stability part, but more on hip mobility and spine mobility. So that's why it's important to start with the basics. And with optimal basics, you can improve easily to the specifics. And of course, at the end of the training, you try to cool down, release the structures and so on. So there are also some options for the core to release the tension. So mostly also Sambo with the grip and everything, of course, the pecs, everything that is inside is very tight. So as a prevention, also for the spine, we want to open up not only classic chest stretching, but also different variations. So now it's about a mix of mobility, flexibility that you can use as a warm-up, but also if you want at the end of the session. Very effective exercise. You are lying on a long foam roller. So by lying on it, you open up your spine already. And with small, slow movements overhead and back, you just release and stretch the whole pectoralis in a dynamic way. So it's not static stretching, but it's an active, full range of motion flexibility move. So different variations to release the front. The same thing, not only static. So all the stretches that you use, try not only to work static, but try to integrate dynamic movements. Because from experience in training, therapy, medicine, we know that with dynamic movements, there are more adaptations in the structures and not just to stay in one position. So the dynamic way is sometimes, many times, more effective than just static. So just different stretches. Here also, if the latissimus, the big back muscle is really tight, classic stretches for the latissimus to stretch in a dynamic way. So if somebody is more stiff than weak, so of course you will not just say, okay, I have to mobilize the spine, but you have also to release all the structures, because if the muscles are tight, the chest, the latissimus, everything, of course the spine will not allow more movement, mobility. That's why it's a balance between muscles and passive structures like the spine. So release the structures, mobilize the spine. You have to do both if you have some athletes who are really stiff. Also here, to stretch the muscles between the pelvis and the spine, it's called quadratus lumborum. For many athletes who have many times like one leg longer than the other, it's just mostly functional length, not anatomical. So just by stretching these muscles between pelvis and spine, doing it for 20-30 seconds, then we'll recheck and we see that they are straight again. So if a patient or athlete feels like, it hurts in the back, and then you check, one leg is longer, whatsoever, integrate these stretches also into your training. The same thing can be, of course, done in standing, classic for the quadratus lumborum. You can do it static or you can do it dynamic. So it's up to you what version you use. Then, of course, the tightness from the front, the pectoralis, not only from Sambo, but also nowadays the whole new generation, computer, phone, and so on. Everybody is stiff in the spine, the shoulders are protracted. So it's important to open up, release the pectoralis. So you can use the static position, but also you can integrate dynamic movements. Like here, the same thing, but working over body rotation. Static, dynamic. Of course, as I said, you can combine both. You can say, okay, I go into chest pectoralis stretch and I stay 10 seconds. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10. And then I do 10 dynamic movements. And then I stay again for 10 seconds static. So you can combine these methods. You can play with it when it's about stretching and try to find out what's the most effective way for your athletes, where they feel most release, because again, every athlete is an individual. So what counts for one as the best solution might not be the same for the other one. So everybody is an individual. That's why you have to look for options. And here also We don't need always a physio to release tight trigger points and so on. You can also use, for example, simple trigger point balls. I prefer lacrosse balls. They have a good tightness and are not too big. And you put the trigger point ball on the chest where it's really tight, and through extra movements, you work on the tight trigger point. Release it by yourself. So I note that we don't have always medical staff around us who can push and massage and so on. So self-treatment is sometimes very effective. The same thing if it's tight around the neck area or latissimus, we can use the same thing, the ball outside of the latissimus, and push with the body against the ball and do extra movements. And then put the ball a little bit higher or lower to get different structures of the latissimus. So it's like a self-treatment. The same thing can be done for the trapeze muscle up here. If it's really tight, take the ball, put it on the painful part, and work on the trigger points by yourself. Here by the horizontal flexion and extension. Mobilize, work through the trigger point, and then again change the position of the ball. So this way you release it all the way. And the same thing can be done also with a different movement. For example, here, diagonal movements, also for the trigger points. So you see, it's not always that we need a medical staff to release tension and to work on stuff. We can do it by ourselves. So it's important for you to see the big picture, to improve mobility. Of course, you also have to release the tension of the structures of the muscles. If somebody is only in the gym doing weightlifting, of course, he will be strong, but tight. And to tell him you have to mobilize your spine, nothing will happen because the muscles don't allow it. So you have to work on the flexibility of the structures and then also on the mobility of the spine. So these two things, they belong together. And also here, if you really want to release the upper part of the trapezius, put the ball on the spot and work on it and release the structures. So again, to improve, if you have athletes who are more stiff than weak, then have the big view on mobility and flexibility. Mobilize the hip, mobilize the spine, but also at the same time, choose several methods to release the tension by stretching, by using foam roller, by using trigger point balls, by using a physio who massages whatsoever. But just by massaging, things will not get better. To release the tension in the structures, it's just the basis we need to improve the mobility, to work on the mobility. So we need both things. And if your athletes are more weak than stiff, then don't forget the big picture that we need a muscle balance in the core, ventral, dorsal, lateral, a nice balance, and that we need to integrate also then the pelvis stability for the lower extremities. This will be more topic when we will teach in near future about then the lower limbs, specifically for Sambo. Then we'll talk even more about how important it is to stabilize the pelvis and how important it is to stabilize the leg for the throws. But without the understanding of the importance of the center of the body, the whole big picture will not work. So that's why our focus today was core mobility, core stability. And as I repeated myself many times, also the hip joint is important when we talk about the core, and also the pelvic stability is important. And for Sambo, again, are you working on the basis? Then, of course, use exercises in lying positions, because there, when they lie, there are not many compensations possible. You get more quality. Start to work slow, start to work static, but then start to do it more and more dynamic with high quality, good control, and then integrate asymmetric positions, and then build it up step by step into standing positions, and then into dynamics, into movement, reactivity, and so on. So if you understood our approach today, the big picture, because there are thousands of exercises on the market, on the internet, you'll see them everywhere. This is great. But for you, it's important, if you see a great exercise on YouTube, that you take the exercise and think about, okay, this is my methodical steps. This one belongs up here. So it's cool, but I'm working with my athletes right now down here. So maybe it comes later. I don't need it right now. So don't say, oh, in America, they said on YouTube, the exercise is the best. Okay, let's just do it. This makes no sense. You have to understand the big picture and to understand when will you use what exercise. And don't forget about core training itself, mobility, stability. It should be part of every single training, every warm-up. There's no excuse. When we train with the own body, strength, endurance, recovery is 12, 24 hours. So you can do it every day. So like excuses, yeah, Monday is my core day, but the rest of the week I recover. No, every day you can work on it. And it doesn't mean that you have to change your whole training system. We are talking about 10, 15 minutes of a warm-up where you integrate those mobility exercises, where you integrate those stability exercises. And then with this approach, you will see that the effect on the specific movement, specific sport like Sambo on the throws will be much better than just to think that you have to change the technique. Good. That was, from my view, just the big picture with a lot of exercises for you, for sure, but you will get it anyways, so don't worry. And I see there is a hand up and we have, I think, some questions. So we have time now. If you have specific questions, basic questions, just ask me. And we have from FIAS people who can translate if there's a problem. Brahma, I can see there's a hand up, or is it? Yes.
Yeah, no question.
No question?
We ask him via the chat.
Yeah, if you have questions, you don't want to talk, just write it in the chat. Yeah, great stuff, Roman. That's nice. Will we get a recording of this session? Valerie, Taro, my colleague, he recorded it. So if you want to see it again, to hear some of the topics again, no problem. We recorded it. So of course, you will receive the link to see it every night before you go to bed. So it gets into your blood. So the recording is there. You can have the recordings, you can have all the exercises. And the goal is also, as I said, from now, at the beginning, I showed you a big picture of all the structures. That was the introductional seminar. Now, the main topic was the most important center of the body. And the next step would be this is our level 1 education. Then it would be level 2, where we focus with the core on the lower extremities. The most important transfer, core, pelvis, and lower limbs. And if that works, then you will see all the one leg exercises in Sambo and everything you use will be more effective because you help your athletes again through the basics and then to the specific sport.
Roman, thank you very much for your fantastic presentation. For everyone, on behalf of FIAS, I think it's a great opportunity for us to having you with us and to explain those things. So I'm really grateful for the presentation. I hope that everybody understood the aim of International Sambo Federation and to give the opportunity for our athletes, for our coaches, for the medical and physio staff of your teams to enhance your performance, to get the best of your knowledge to the athletes. So I'm really grateful for your deep insight of knowledge that you are giving us and transferring to our organization. I hope that everybody enjoyed it and had a fun with those exercises you showed. There was so many of the informations you provided us, and I'm really grateful for that insight. If there is anyone from the members or currently who are watching that webinars, please raise the question right now. That is the moment. If you don't have anything, then there are still 2 opportunities to join us for the same webinars, which will be conducted today at 2 p.m. of Central European time, and then 30th of April at 5 p.m. Central European time, which means you can also join and to repeat those things or just to memorize those things with Roman just mentioned it. And really, I hope that you take the best of, and I thank you for all of your attention. So if you have any kind of questions, please go ahead now. If not, maybe we can give a final words to Roman to close that session.
Thank you, Michal. If you...
Hello.
Oh, yeah,
Hello.
question. Yes.
I'm Santosh. Please send this PDF of all exercise via email.
You receive all the exercises from us or FIAS, I don't know yet, as a PDF. So you will have all the exercises with pictures. So don't worry, you'll get it.
Okay, thank you. Thank you. It is a good seminar conducted by you. Thank you, sir.
Maybe I can give you some further information on this. FIAS will provide you with the PDF files with all the shown exercises, and FIAS will provide you with a link to review the session. And as Michael told you, we have the same session today again and on Friday. And while you start with your hopefully many questions, we start a poll, a survey, and ask you to contribute. Any questions? Roman, your microphone is off.
Oh, okay, I'm back. So from my side, one more time, I hope you understand the big picture and that you saw that sometimes the answers are simpler than we think, because many coaches are focused on specific movements of the technique. But if you try to work on the basics, you will help for sure for the specifics. If you are wrong, to work on the basics will still help for injury prevention. So you can't do anything wrong. Keep your eyes open, check the posture of your athletes, check the mobility, stability, on what level they are, and try to integrate those variations into your training. They will have fun, they will improve. And if you have more questions or you want even more topics about that, just write to FIAS, write to us, and we try to put something together, spread the information, because we try to support FIAS and Sambo coaches around the world. So if you liked it, we hope to see you soon for the next step, level 2. And thank you for your attention and enjoy your day. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you. Thank you
Thank
so
you,
much.
gentlemen. Thank you, gentlemen.
Thank you, Roman. That was very interesting.
Thank you.
Yeah, Grant, thank you so much.
Dimitri, thank you very much for this feedback.
Thank you. Thank you.